2 hours after I buried my 8-year-old son, his teacher called me with a trembling voice. "Ma'am, I found something you must see. Come to the school and meet me in the office right now. Don't tell your family or anyone. This is dangerous." And when I arrived, the figure standing in front of the door made me tremble. I didn't expect it because that figure was... Before the story begins, please write in the comments from which area you are watching this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that Revenge with Jane can grow even more and present more interesting stories. 2 hours after I buried my 8-year-old son, the house felt like a cold hell. The scent of jasmine and tuberose still stung my nose, mixed with the smell of wet earth clinging to the edge of my black morning dress. People were still moving around the living room, whispering condolences that sounded empty to my ears. They said I had to find peace. They said Kevin was already at rest in heaven. However, none of those words were able to ease the pain tearing at my chest. Kevin was only 8 years old. He was a healthy, cheerful, and energetic boy. The doctor said it was a sudden heart attack, a rare medical anomaly. I didn't believe it, but I didn't have the energy to argue. I sat in the corner of the room, staring blankly at the frame of Kevin's photo, where he was smiling widely while holding a trophy from a running race. Outside, my husband, David, was shaking hands with the guests. His face was puffy, his eyes were red, and his shoulders were slumped, as if bearing a heavy burden. Everyone praised David's fortitude. They said he was an extraordinary husband and father, remaining strong for his shattered wife. I watched him through a crack in the slightly open bedroom door. David received a hug from Mr. Raymond, the chairman of the foundation where Kevin went to school. Mr. Raymond patted David's back hard, giving moral support like a father to his son. The sight should have touched me, but for some reason, something made me feel sick to my stomach. My phone vibrated on the bed, breaking my long daydream. The screen lit up, displaying the name of Mrs. Riley, Kevin's homeroom teacher. I frowned. Why was his teacher calling at a time like this? Hadn't she just come to the funeral? With trembling hands, I swiped the green button and held the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end sounded very quiet, almost like a whisper choked by fear. Mrs. Riley sounded panicked. Her breath was racing as if she were hiding in a narrow closet. Mrs. Riley asked me to listen carefully. She said she had found something I had to see with my own eyes, something left in Kevin's desk drawer. Her voice trembled violently as she asked me to come to school right now and meet her in the teacher's office. She emphasized one thing that made my blood run cold. She forbade me from telling anyone, including my own family. She said it was dangerous. My heart beat fast, faster than before. It felt as if the paralyzing grief was suddenly replaced by alertness. There was an urgency in Mrs. Riley's voice that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a call about a forgotten item. This was about Kevin. A mother's instinct, having just lost her child, suddenly took over. I wiped the tears from my cheeks harshly. I had to go there. I had to know what she meant by dangerous. I left the room with forced heavy steps. I approached David, who was still talking to Mr. Raymond on the front porch. I whispered softly to David, saying that my head hurt very badly and I needed migraine medicine that was left in the car. At the same time, I said I wanted to get some fresh air at the convenience store in front of the neighborhood. David looked at me with such a convincing concerned gaze. He offered to buy it, but I politely refused. I said I needed 15 minutes of alone time. Mister. Raymond smiled thinly, suggesting that I shouldn't go for too long because the night air wasn't good for my weak physical condition. I nodded respectfully, then hurried to my car parked at the end of the road. The road to Kevin's school felt very long that night. A light drizzle began to fall, making the asphalt glisten as it reflected the dim streetlights. My mind was racing. What did Mrs. Riley find? Why was she so afraid? And why did she forbid me from telling David? All this time, David had been the perfect father to Kevin. It was impossible that David had anything to do with the danger Mrs. Riley mentioned. However, doubt began to grow. It spread slowly like weeds on the wall of my heart. The image of Kevin's pale face at the hospital returned to haunt me. The doctor said his organs failed, but Kevin never had a history of serious illness. The school building looked terrifying at night. The front gate was slightly open, as if intentionally left unlocked for me. The school security guard was nowhere to be seen at the guard post. Maybe he was patrolling, or there simply wasn't a schedule tonight, as the school was on morning leave for Kevin. I parked the car a bit far away, under a large oak tree that obscured the view from the highway. I didn't want anyone to see my car there. With quick steps, I pushed through the drizzle, jogging toward the main corridor. The school hallways, usually noisy with children's voices, were silent. Only the echo of my own footsteps could be heard bouncing off the tile floor. My destination was the teacher's lounge on the second floor. The lights in that hallway were off, with only dim light coming from the garden lamps below. However, I saw a beam of light coming from under the door of the teacher's office. Mrs. Riley must be in there. I quickened my pace, but for some reason, my feeling grew even worse. The air felt heavy, as if something were lurking in the darkness. I remembered Kevin often talking about how much he liked Mrs. Riley because his teacher was patient and kind-hearted. If Mrs. Riley was as frightened as she sounded earlier, it must be something very big. I reached the door of the teacher's office. The door was not closed tightly. There was a gap of about 4 inches that allowed me to peek inside. I held my breath, trying to assess the situation before entering. My heart seemed to stop beating when I saw the scene inside. Mrs. Riley was not alone. She was cornered in the back of the room, near the filing cabinet. Her face was deathly pale. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her body was trembling violently. Both of her hands were raised as if begging for mercy. In front of her stood a man with his back to me. The man was wearing a black shirt that I recognized very well. His posture, the way he stood, even the faint scent of perfume reaching the door. Everything was so familiar. The man was already holding a small black object, perhaps a flash drive, and he was speaking in a low, threatening tone. His voice was cold, sharp, and devoid of any warmth. That voice was 180 degrees different from the gentle voice I usually heard at home. I pushed the door slowly, making the hinges creak slightly. The man turned around with a quick and alert motion. As his face caught the fluorescent light of the room, my knees went weak instantly. I had to hold onto the door frame to keep from falling to the floor. The figure standing at the door, who had terrified Mrs. Riley to death, was David, my own husband, the father of my child, whom we had just buried 2 hours ago. David looked at me. There was no surprise on his face, only a terrifying flat stare, before it slowly changed into a forced expression of sadness. His eyes, which had been shining sharply, now dimmed, trying to manipulate the situation. In his hand, he gripped that small object tightly. I stared at him, then turned to look at Mrs. Riley, who was now crying silently. My brain tried to process what was happening. David should have been at home, receiving guests, grieving with me. Why was he here? Why was he threatening our child's teacher? And what was the content of that small object in his hand? Those questions swirled in my head, but my tongue was tied. I could only stand there frozen, trembling, realizing that my nightmare had just begun. The silence in the teacher's lounge was suffocating. Only the hum of the air conditioner and Mrs. Riley's quiet sobbing filled the air. David broke the silence by approaching me with a calm step. His face, which had been cold, had now completely transformed into that of a fragile, grieving husband. He reached out his arms as if to hug me. David said in a raspy voice that he didn't expect me to follow him here. He reasoned that he couldn't stand being at home because there were too many memories of Kevin. He said he came to the school to pick up Kevin's things that were left in his desk drawer, because he wanted to keep them as memories before the school cleaned the classroom the next morning. His reason sounded so plausible, so touching. If only I hadn't seen the look in his eyes a few seconds ago. If only I hadn't seen how Mrs. Riley was cornered in terror at the back of the room. I looked at Mrs. Riley, seeking confirmation. The woman looked extremely frightened. Her eyes moved anxiously between me and David. When David glanced briefly at her with a hidden, sharp look, Mrs. Riley immediately nodded quickly, confirming David's words. Mrs. Riley said in a trembling voice that Mr. David had indeed come to pick up Kevin's things, and they were talking about how good Kevin was during his life. I knew it was a lie. I could see cold sweat flowing down Mrs. Riley's temples. I could see her hands gripping the edge of her skirt until her knuckles turned white. She was being threatened. David hugged my shoulders tightly, too tightly that it felt painful. He invited me to go home, saying that it wasn't good for us to linger in a place that triggered this sadness. He took a small cardboard box from the table, which he said contained Kevin's drawing books and stationery. With a very smooth motion, David put the small black object he was holding into his pants pocket. He thought I didn't see it, but my eyes caught the movement clearly. Before we went out, David walked ahead of me toward the door. In that very brief second, Mrs. Riley took the opportunity. She stepped quickly toward me, pretending to fix the position of my scarf, which was slightly crooked. Her cold hand touched my neck, and I felt her slip a small, neatly folded piece of paper into the fold of my scarf at the shoulder. She looked into my eyes intently, a gaze that conveyed a plea for help and a stark warning. Her lips moved without sound, saying one word, "Run!" My heart raced even faster. I tried to act normal, nodding slightly to her as if to say thank you. David turned, looking at us suspiciously. He asked what we were talking about. I answered quickly that Mrs. Riley only asked me to be strong. David seemed satisfied with that answer, then pulled my hand to leave the room. We left Mrs. Riley alone there, standing in the middle of the silent room like a wax statue ready to melt from the heat of fear. The ride home in the car felt like a journey to an execution. David drove calmly, occasionally wiping his eyes as if wiping away tears. He played classical music at a low volume, the type of music he usually played when he wanted to calm himself. But to me, the music sounded like a funeral dirge. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, watching the raindrops falling harder against the glass. My hand felt the fold of my scarf, making sure the small paper was still there. I wanted to read it now, but I was afraid David would see it. I glanced at David from the corner of my eye. The man who had been married to me for 10 years suddenly felt like a stranger. I remembered all the events of the last few months. Kevin often complaining of stomach aches, Kevin becoming weak and often falling asleep, and David always insisting on handling Kevin's medication himself. David always forbade me from taking Kevin to another doctor, reasoning that our family doctor, who turned out to be a distant cousin of Mr. Raymond, understood Kevin's condition best. Those puzzle pieces began to assemble in my head, forming a terrifying picture. Arriving home, the atmosphere was quieter. Most of the guests had gone home, leaving only a few close relatives clearing chairs in the yard. I immediately made an excuse that I felt very dizzy and wanted to go to sleep right away. David offered to make warm tea, but I refused. I said I just needed sleep. I went into the room, locked the door, and leaned my back against it. My breath was racing. I waited until David's footsteps were heard heading toward the kitchen. With trembling hands, I took the small paper from the fold of my scarf. The paper was torn from a school notebook. The writing was messy, written in a hurry, perhaps while I was walking in the corridor. I read it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. Kevin didn't have heart disease. His medicine was replaced with low-dose poison. Check the teddy bear in Kevin's room. He recorded something before he left. Be careful. Your husband is dangerous. My world collapsed instantly. My knees could no longer support my body, and I slumped to the floor. Kevin, my dear son. He didn't die because of illness. He was murdered. And the killer was in this house, making tea in the kitchen, pretending to be a grieving father. The pain I felt earlier turned into a burning anger. My tears dried instantly. I couldn't cry now. I had to prove this truth. I stood up and crept toward Kevin's room, which was located next to the main bedroom. The bedroom door was tightly closed. I opened it slowly. The scent of baby oil and powder was still strong here. Kevin's characteristic scent. This room was still the same as when he left it. Full of Lego toys, superhero posters, and storybooks. On his bed sat a large brown teddy bear that Kevin always hugged when he slept. The bear was a birthday gift from me 2 years ago. I approached the bear. My hands trembled as I touched its soft fur. I felt the bear's stomach, looking for something unusual. There was a slightly rough stitch on the back of the bear, as if it had been opened and sewn back together sloppily by a child's hand. I remembered Kevin learning to sew at school. Using the nail scissors on the study desk, I opened the stitches bit by bit. Inside the bear's stomach, tucked between the white stuffing, I found a small digital voice recorder. This device was a detective toy that Daniel, my best friend, had bought for Kevin. Kevin loved to pretend to be a spy. I pressed the play button with sweaty, cold fingers. Kevin's voice was heard, weak and hoarse. Today my stomach hurts again after Dad gave me the red medicine. It tastes really bitter, different from the medicine from Mom. I'm afraid to tell Mom. Dad might get angry again like that time. Dad says this is a super vitamin to make me strong. But why does it hurt? Then the sound of a door opening was heard in the recording, and heavy footsteps approached. That was David's voice. He was talking to someone on the phone. His voice was recorded clearly. "Don't worry, Mr. Raymond, I've increased the dose. The kid won't last until next week. Once he's gone, the inheritance from his grandfather will be liquidated through the guardian, which is me. We'll split it in half as agreed. Just make sure the foundation's land certificates are ready for the name transfer." The recording ended. The silence of the room was deafening. I covered my mouth to hold back a hysterical scream. My body shook violently. My husband. He killed our child for inheritance money. Inheritance from my late father that was indeed in Kevin's name. David had planned this all along with Mr. Raymond. They were monsters with human faces. Suddenly, the doorknob of Kevin's room moved. Someone tried to open it from the outside, but I had locked it from the inside. "Hilda." David's voice was heard from behind the door. His tone was no longer gentle. His voice was heavy, full of suspicion, and contained a hidden threat. "Why is the door locked? Are you inside? Open the door. Hilda, I know you're not asleep yet." The banging on the door grew louder. "Open the door. Don't make me break it down." I backed away from the door, clutching the teddy bear and the recorder tightly to my chest. I was trapped. My son's killer was right behind the door, and he knew I knew his secret. The banging on Kevin's bedroom door became more brutal, as if the solid wood was just a sheet of paper ready to be torn. David was no longer trying to hide his anger. He shouted my name in a tone I had never heard in my life, a tone that combined panic and pure cruelty. Every blow of his body against the door made the picture frames on the wall shake, in sync with my racing heartbeat. I knew when that door opened, my life would be on the line. David was no longer my husband. He was a stranger I just learned had ended the life of his own flesh and blood for a pile of wealth. I held Kevin's teddy bear tightly, as if that object could protect me from the monster out there. I had already put the small recorder into my pocket, the most precious object that had now become my only weapon to demand justice. I racked my brain quickly in the midst of the panic. I couldn't get out through the door. The window was the only way out. Kevin's room was on the second floor. But I remembered there was a large mango tree growing beside the house, its branches reaching close enough to the small balcony in this room. I used to scold Kevin because he liked to climb that tree. But now, Kevin's childhood mischief was what might save his mother's life. I ran toward the window, unlocked it with trembling hands, and pushed the window open wide. The night wind carrying raindrops immediately slapped my face, cold and piercing to the bone. The rain was falling harder, creating a curtain of water that blurred the view, but the booming thunder at least masked the sound of my movement. Behind me, the sound of cracking wood was loud. The door hinges were beginning to give in to David's strength. I had no more time. Without thinking, I climbed the balcony railing. My feet fumbled for a foothold on the wet and slippery tree branch. The fear of heights that usually haunted me vanished instantly, replaced by a much more primal survival instinct. I made a small jump, grabbing a thick enough branch with both hands. The rough bark scratched my palms until they stung, but I held back a scream. My long dress, soaked through, felt heavy and got caught on a small twig, hindering my movement for a few crucial seconds. I pulled the fabric with all my might until a tearing sound was heard. I didn't care about the clothes. The important thing was that I had to get down. Exactly when my feet landed on the muddy side yard grass, a loud thud was heard from above. Kevin's bedroom door had been broken down. I looked up briefly and saw David's silhouette standing in the doorway of the brightly lit room. He ran toward the balcony, sticking his head out, staring into the darkness of the night. I covered my mouth and pressed my body against the large tree trunk, holding my breath as hard as I could. A flash of lightning struck, illuminating the yard for a split second. If David looked down at that moment, it would be the end of me. However, it seemed the heavy rain blocked his view. He screamed in frustration, a long and terrifying scream, then turned back into the room, perhaps thinking I was hiding in the closet or bathroom. I didn't waste time. With bare feet that were freezing and full of mud, I crept along the side wall of the house toward the back gate. I knew David would soon realize I wasn't in the room and would start searching for me throughout the house. Then the yard. I had to get out of this neighborhood before he mobilized security or his hired men. Mr. Raymond had many connections, and I didn't know who could be trusted in this neighborhood. Every shadow of a tree looked like a lurking enemy. My breath was shallow, mixed with the sobbing I was fighting to hold back. The memory of Kevin's smiling face gave me supernatural strength to keep running through the rain, leaving the house that should have been the safest place, but had now turned into a killer's den. I managed to get out through a small door in the back fence usually used by the gardener. The road behind the neighborhood was quiet and dark. I kept running without looking back, toward the main highway about 1.5 miles away. My soaked phone in my pocket vibrated, but I didn't dare answer it. It must be David. I kept running until my lungs felt like they were going to explode. In front of a closed shop, under the dim streetlight, I stopped to catch my breath. My trembling hand reached for the phone. There were 10 missed calls from David. I ignored them and searched for one name in the contact list. Daniel. Daniel had been my best friend since high school, the only person I knew I could trust right now. He was a stubborn investigative journalist and often dealt with complicated cases. I pressed the call button, praying in my heart that he wasn't asleep yet. The dial tone was heard twice. Then Daniel's heavy, raspy voice answered. I couldn't say much. With a choked voice mixed with tears, I could only whisper, Daniel, help me. David killed Kevin. I ran away. Pick me up near the gas station on the highway right now. Don't ask anything yet. Hurry. I cut the phone connection before Daniel could even ask. Then I turned off my phone completely so my position couldn't be traced. I crouched in the dark corner of the shop, hugging my knees, waiting in gripping fear, hoping Daniel would come before David found me. 15 minutes felt like 15 years. Every beam of light from a passing car made my heart stop. I was afraid it was David's black SUV. However, finally, an old gray sedan pulled over slowly in front of me. The window rolled down, showing Daniel's anxious face. Without a word, I immediately jumped into the front passenger seat and locked the door. Daniel stared at me with wide eyes. My appearance must have been terrifying. Soaked, muddy, hair a mess, and face pale like a living corpse. Daniel didn't ask many questions. He immediately hit the gas, taking the car away from my residential area at high speed. He knew from the look in my eyes that this situation wasn't just an ordinary household argument. In the warmth of the car, my body began to shake uncontrollably, not just because of the cold, but because the adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving deep exhaustion and trauma. Daniel gave me his jacket from the back seat. He drove with one hand, while his left hand held my cold hand, trying to provide strength. I started telling him everything, starting from the phone call, Mrs. Riley's call, the meeting at school, David's real face, and the recording of Kevin's voice inside the teddy bear. Every sentence that came out of my mouth felt painful, like vomiting nails. When I played the recording of Kevin's voice and David's conversation with Mr. Raymond, Daniel slammed the steering wheel toward the side of the road and stopped the car abruptly. His face turned red with rage. His jaw tightened. He hit the steering wheel hard, swearing at David and Mr. Raymond. Daniel listened to the recording once more carefully. As a journalist, he immediately analyzed the situation logically, even though his emotions were boiling. He said this evidence was very strong, but also very dangerous. Mr. Raymond was not an ordinary person. He had great influence in this city, maybe even acquaintances in the high-level police. If we were reckless and reported to the local precinct, the evidence could disappear, or worse, we would be silenced before we could testify. Daniel decided to take me to a safe house, a small apartment belonging to his late uncle on the outskirts of the city that no one knew about, including his own family. That place would be our headquarters for making a plan. In the middle of the journey, Daniel turned on the radio to break the suffocating silence. The midnight news was being broadcast. At first, it was just regular traffic news. Then the news anchor read a current report that made my blood stop flowing. A woman's body was found in the elementary schoolyard on Maple Street. The victim was identified as a teacher with the initials AR. The temporary suspicion was that the victim committed suicide by jumping from the third floor of the school building. My world went dark instantly. I screamed hysterically in the car. Mrs. Riley, they killed her. David and Mr. Raymond killed her. The word suicide was the most cruel lie I had ever heard. Mrs. Riley couldn't have committed suicide. She had just given me a clue. She wanted to save Kevin. She wanted the truth to be revealed. And because she helped me, she had to pay with her life. Guilt hit my chest harder than Kevin's death. If only I had come faster. If only I could have taken her with me earlier. But I left her alone with that monster. I cried as hard as I could, hitting the car's dashboard. Daniel pulled the car over again. This time he pulled me into his arms, letting me pour out all the unbearable sadness and guilt. However, in the midst of that crying, something inside me changed. The sadness that had been paralyzing slowly hardened into something cold and sharp. My tears stopped flowing. I released Daniel's hug and stared straight at the dark road ahead. I remembered Mrs. Riley's last look, a look that asked me to run and fight. Her death must not be in vain. Kevin's death must not be in vain. They thought they could clean all traces by killing the witness and faking the news. They were dead wrong. They left one person behind, me. A mother who had nothing left to fear because she had lost everything. I turned toward Daniel with a new look, the look of a woman ready to burn the world for justice. I said to Daniel in a terrifyingly calm voice, "They have to pay." "Daniel, not with prison. That's too easy. I want to destroy their lives to the core as they destroyed mine. I want them to feel the fear that Kevin and Mrs. Riley felt." Daniel stared at me, seeing that drastic change. He nodded slowly, agreeing to the silent oath between us. We wouldn't report to the police tonight. We would play by their rules. We needed physical evidence. A voice recording alone could be denied in court as a digital fabrication, especially with the expensive lawyers Mr. Raymond could hire. We needed that poison bottle, the medicine David swapped. That object must still be somewhere, because David was a meticulous but arrogant person. He must have kept it as a trophy, or hadn't had the chance to dispose of it properly, because he was panicking while looking for me. That night in the dusty small apartment, we drew up a plan. I no longer felt like a victim. I was a hunter now. I cut my hair short, threw away my black dress, and borrowed casual clothes from Daniel's uncle's old belongings. The identity of Hilda, the weak and obedient, had died with Kevin. Tomorrow, I would return to that snake's nest. Not as a wife returning home, but as a nightmare they never accounted for. We devised a strategy to sneak back into the house and David's office. I knew where David used to hide his secret items. There was a hidden safe behind the painting in his study, a safe he thought I didn't know the combination to. Actually, I had seen him opening it years ago. Kevin's birthday. How ironic. He used the birthday of the child he killed as his security key. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. That morning, the Chicago sky was gray, as if also grieving, or perhaps hiding the big plan we had composed. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror of Daniel's uncle's worn-out apartment, staring at a reflection that was almost unrecognizable. My long hair that usually hung beautifully was now hidden under a dull navy blue instant headscarf, the type often used by labor workers for convenience. I wore a light blue cleaning service uniform that was slightly too big, complete with a fake ID card Daniel made last night. My name on the card wasn't Hilda, but Sue. My pale face was covered with a bit of uneven powder and thick frame glasses that made my eyes look smaller. The fragile Hilda, the obedient wife of a successful businessman, died that night with her son. Now standing was a mother who had nothing left but the vengeance burning in her chest. Daniel parked his car 2 blocks from the office building owned by Mr. Raymond, where David worked as the operational director. Our plan was simple but high risk. Every Friday, there was usually a shift change of cleaning teams from an outside vendor to do a thorough cleaning before the weekend. Daniel managed to hack their schedule system and insert my pseudonym into the attendance list. My job was to go inside, head to the executive floor where access was limited, and look for physical evidence of the poison in David's office safe. We assumed David moved the evidence there because our house was no longer safe after I escaped. David surely thought I would return to the house to look for evidence. So the office was the most logical hiding place, according to his cunning way of thinking. I walked with my head down, dragging a trolley containing mop equipment and buckets, blending in with other cleaning staff entering through the back door. My heart beat fast every time I passed a security guard, afraid they would recognize their boss's wife. However, it turned out that people like David and Mr. Raymond never really saw little people like the cleaning service. To them, we were just shadows, cleaning up their dirt, without faces, without identities. I managed to pass through security checks easily. The freight elevator took me up to the 12th floor, where David's office was located. The hallway on that floor was quiet and cold, covered with thick carpet that muffled the sound of footsteps. A faint scent of lavender room freshener hung in the air, the same scent that always clung to David's work clothes. Nausea hit my stomach, reminding me of the betrayal of that man. I pushed the trolley toward the double doors labeled Operational Director. The door was locked, but Daniel had provided me with a duplicate access card he copied from one belonging to a trusted staff member of David's who was often careless with their things. The indicator light turned green and the door opened with a soft click. The room was spacious, luxurious, and cold. A photo of our family, me, David, and Kevin, was still prominently displayed on the wall behind his desk. Seeing Kevin's smiling face in that photo made my chest tight. David put up that photo not out of love, but as a mask to build a perfect family image in front of his business colleagues. Behind the abstract painting on the left wall, I knew there was a hidden safe. With hands trembling from tension, I took down the painting and found the digital safe panel. I took a long breath, trying to calm myself. The combination was Kevin's birthday. I pressed the numbers 05117. The green light came on and the safe door opened. My heart raced with hope, hoping to find that medicine bottle. However, when I looked inside, the safe was empty of any medicine bottle. There were only stacks of land certificate documents, several bundles of cash, and David's dual passports. Disappointment hit me, but I couldn't give up. I started taking photos of those documents with a hidden camera in my shirt button. The documents showed illegal asset transfers of the foundation into David's private account. This was evidence of corruption, but not yet enough to prove murder. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps and laughter from the corridor approached the room door. Panic seized me. I immediately closed the safe, hung the painting back up crookedly because I was in a hurry, and grabbed a cleaning cloth. I crouched behind the large sofa in the corner of the room, pretending to be cleaning dust off the table legs, just as the door opened. David walked in, followed by a stylish young woman. It was Bella, his personal secretary. I held my breath, trying to shrink my body into the shadows of the sofa. They didn't notice my presence because the position of the sofa faced away from the door and was covered by a tall filing cabinet. What I heard next made my blood boil to my head. David didn't look sad at all. He instead laughed loudly while pouring a drink into a glass. Bella sat on the edge of David's desk casually, flirting with my husband. They talked about Kevin's death as if it were a successful business project. Bella praised David for his perfect acting at the funeral. She said David's crying was so convincing that even Mr. Raymond was impressed. David laughed proudly, saying that getting rid of the little burden was the best step for their future. He referred to Kevin as a sickly child who only spent money and was the main obstacle to liquidating my father's inheritance worth millions. My hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. the sharp pain keeping me conscious so I wouldn't jump out and choke them both right then. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear their faces, but I knew I would lose if I used physical violence. I pressed the record button on the small bugging device I carried in my pants pocket. Every cruel word that came out of their mouths was recorded clearly. They were planning a vacation to Europe next month, after the situation cooled down and the inheritance money was liquidated. They even laughed at my stupidity for running away, considering me a crazy wife whose body would soon be found in a gutter due to depression. "Don't worry, honey," David said while kissing Bella's forehead. The voice that used to make me feel safe now sounded like the hiss of a venomous snake. "Hilda is weak. Without me, she's nothing. Even if she reports to the police, who will believe her? Mr. Raymond has already arranged everything. The police, the forensic doctors, they're all in our pocket. That poison bottle was also thrown into the medical waste incinerator this morning. No traces. We won." Hearing that, my hope of finding the poison bottle vanished. But I had gained something more valuable: arrogant oral confessions and their plans involving many parties. When they left for lunch, I waited 10 minutes in my hiding place with tears of anger flowing silently. After making sure they were gone, I left that room carrying even greater vengeance. Before leaving, I left one small message. I took a small toy car belonging to Kevin that I had kept in my pocket since last night and placed it exactly in the middle of David's desk, on top of the neat stack of files. Let him know that a ghost from his past has returned. We went back to the small headquarters, carrying the heart-wrenching but crucial voice recording. Daniel listened to David and Bella's conversation with a face red with anger. He, who was usually calm and logical, even had to go out to the balcony to smoke to calm his emotions. Their crime was no longer just ordinary criminality. This was a manifestation of demons in human form. However, Daniel also agreed that this evidence, while morally strong, could still be defeated in court as an illegal recording. We needed them to make a fatal mistake in public. We needed them to attack each other. And the best trigger to make a criminal make a mistake is fear. That night, we started our psychological operation. David was a rational person, but had deep-seated fears of the supernatural. A weakness he once told me when we were first married. He was afraid of karma, even though he always denied it. Daniel, with his technological skills, managed to hack the smart home system in our house, the house where David now lived alone. The sophisticated security system David installed to protect him from the outside was now used by us to attack him from the inside. We could control the lights, the temperature, and the audio system throughout the house from Daniel's laptop. The terror began at 12 on midnight. Through the hidden cameras in the living room that we tapped, I saw David sitting and drinking alcohol, looking restless. Maybe he had just found Kevin's toy car on his office desk this afternoon. That must have been bothering his mind. I gave a signal to Daniel. He pressed a button on his keyboard. The living room lights in David's house began to flicker irregularly. David was startled, staring at the crystal chandelier with suspicion. He stood up to check the switch, but the lights returned to normal. He sat back down, thinking it was just a regular power surge. However, 5 minutes later, the air conditioning temperature in the master bedroom, where David slept, was lowered drastically to 60 degrees. Through the bedroom camera, I saw David shivering in his sleep, pulling up the thick blanket. Then, we played the recording of Kevin's laugh, a cheerful child's laugh, but played at a very low volume through hidden speakers in the bedroom ceiling, creating a terrifying echo. David woke up with wide eyes. He sat up straight in bed, looking left and right, searching for the source of the sound. "Who's there?" he shouted in a raspy voice. Silence. We turned off the sound. David lay back down, but his eyes remained open, alert. Night after night, we did the same thing, but with increasing intensity. We didn't let him sleep. We made him mentally and physically exhausted. On the third night, we did something more extreme. While David was showering, we played the recording of Kevin's voice moaning in pain when drinking the poison medicine, the sound echoing throughout the bathroom. David ran out of the bathroom with only a towel wrapped around him, slipped on the wet floor, and fell face down. His face was deathly pale, his eyes wild with fear. He started screaming, calling Bella's name, accusing Bella of messing with him because only Bella had access to the house besides himself. Seeds of division began to grow. The paranoid David started suspecting everyone around him. The peak of our plan was the Foundation's gala event, to be held the day after tomorrow at a 5-star hotel. Mr. Raymond would give a speech, and David was scheduled to receive an award as an exemplary father who still contributed to the foundation despite being in mourning. Just the title of the award made me want to vomit. This was their biggest stage for acting, and we planned to turn it into their social execution stage. Daniel managed to get access to the building's projector system for the event through a security vulnerability in the hotel's Wi-Fi network. We prepared a short video, not a sweet memory video like the one they prepared, but a horror montage of the truth they were hiding. The night of the event arrived. I and Daniel monitored from a rented van in the hotel parking lot. Through the monitor screen, I saw David arrive with Mr. Raymond. David looked very bad. The bags under his eyes were black. His face was gaunt, and he kept looking behind him as if someone were following him. Bella was also there, looking beautiful, but annoyed because David kept snapping at her every time she tried to approach. The tension between them was clearly visible. When Mr. Raymond called David onto the stage to receive the award, all the guests applauded. David went to the podium, holding the crystal trophy with trembling hands, and began his hypocritical speech about how much he missed Kevin. "Now," I ordered Daniel. Daniel pressed the execution button. The large screen behind David, which was supposed to display a smiling photo of Kevin, suddenly turned into deafening static. The invited guests covered their ears in shock. The image on the screen turned blood red. Then large text appeared with a font, as if written in dripping blood. "I know what you did." The atmosphere became silent instantly. David turned to look at the screen, his face losing all color. Then, the recording of David and Bella's conversation at the office was played through the building's main loudspeaker at maximum volume. David's arrogant voice was heard clearly. "That sickly kid! I already threw out the poison. We won." The entire room gasped. The guests looked at each other with looks of horror. Bella screamed at her round table, trying to run, but her legs were weak. Mr. Raymond stood frozen, his face red with anger and shame. David panicked completely. He shouted into the microphone, "This is a lie. This is a setup. Someone is trying to frame me. But his voice was drowned out by the guests' jeers. In that panic, David's gaze locked onto Mr. Raymond. He saw Mr. Raymond signaling his head of security to secure David, not to protect him, but to get rid of him, so the foundation's name wouldn't be dragged down. David realized he was being made the sole scapegoat. "You!" David screamed, pointing at Mr. Raymond in front of hundreds of people. "You ordered me. You planned the inheritance split. Don't act holy, Raymond. If I go down, you go down with me." That unintentional public confession was recorded by dozens of journalist cameras covering the event. Chaos broke out. I smiled inside the van. The bait was taken. Those rats were now biting each other. And we just had to wait for the right time to give the final blow. The chaos at the Foundation's gala event that night became the turning point that destroyed everything for David and Mr. Raymond. The video we played and the voice recording echoing throughout the hotel hall went viral within minutes. Social media exploded. The invited guests, most of whom were officials and businessmen who valued influence, immediately distanced themselves, leaving the building with faces of disgust and horror. David, who should have been the star that night, fled through the hotel kitchen door, pursued by dozens of journalists, hungry for sensational news. He disappeared into the darkness of the night, hiding like a cornered sewer rat. Meanwhile, Mr. Raymond used his influence to hold the media for a while. But I knew the foundation of his power was severely cracked. David's scream on stage accusing Mr. Raymond of being the brain behind the inheritance plan was our ace card. However, it was not yet enough to jail them permanently. Mr. Raymond's lawyer would surely argue that it was just the rambling of a stressed person experiencing a mental breakdown due to grief. We needed more concrete evidence, a direct confrontation where they each admitted their roles without any denial. I and Daniel returned to the safe house with adrenaline still pumping fast. We didn't celebrate this small success because we knew a wild animal is most dangerous when wounded. David was now a social fugitive, though not yet officially a police fugitive, because the arrest warrant hadn't been issued. He must be hiding, panicking, and most importantly, he surely felt betrayed by Mr. Raymond, who let security drag him off stage. This gap was what we would exploit. We would pit them against each other until they committed character assassination or even physically killed each other. Daniel prepared 2 burner phones that couldn't be traced. We would play the role of the masterminds behind the scenes, moving the puppets that had lost their strings. We sent the first message to Mr. Raymond, pretending to be David. The message contained a cold threat. "I have copies of the original documents for the asset transfer that you signed. If you don't help me get out of town tonight, I will send them to the police." Then we sent a message to David as if from Mr. Raymond's trusted person. Its content was manipulative. Mr. Raymond wanted to make peace. Situations at the hotel were out of control, but he had a plan to save you. He had already prepared a boat to take you to Canada tonight. Bring all the evidence you have to be destroyed together. Meet at the logistics warehouse at the harbor at 2:06 a.m. Don't be late. The police are starting to move. David, who at this time must be terrified and confused somewhere, would see this as his only ticket to freedom. He had no choice but to believe. The bait had been cast, and the 2 predators were moving toward the same point. our trap. At 1 a.m., heavy rain poured down again, as if the universe was supporting the dark atmosphere we were building. I and Daniel were already at the location earlier. That old logistics warehouse was a massive building that had been abandoned, located on the quiet edge of the harbor. The smell of the sea mixed with the smell of rusty iron filled the air. We sneaked in through a broken ventilation window on the second floor. From this position, we could see the entire spacious and empty ground floor of the warehouse, only illuminated by a few street lights from outside, penetrating the holes in the tin walls. Daniel installed several hidden cameras at strategic points and connected them to a private live stream linked to the police server. Yes, this time we involved the police. Daniel had contacted an acquaintance in the criminal investigation department, providing the initial recording evidence and informing them that a big transaction would occur in this warehouse tonight. The police were on their way to surround this place. But we needed time for David and Raymond to talk before the police sirens wailed. Exactly at 1:50 a.m., a black sedan entered the warehouse area. Its headlights shone on the flying dust. The car door opened and Mr. Raymond came out. He was not alone. 2 burly men, his bodyguards, came down with him. However, Mr. Raymond signaled for them to wait outside. He entered the warehouse alone, holding a small briefcase. His right hand was always behind his jacket, where I was sure he hid a firearm. The old man's face looked hard. His jaw tightened in anger. He stood in the middle of the warehouse, looking at his watch impatiently. 5 minutes later, the warehouse door creaked again. David appeared from the darkness. His appearance was very messy. His expensive shirt was wrinkled and dirty, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild, moving in all directions. He looked like a madman. David walked toward Mr. Raymond with hesitant but hopeful steps. He thought Mr. Raymond was really going to save him. "Where's the boat?" David asked in a raspy voice, his voice echoing off the empty warehouse walls. "You promised to take me away from here." Mr. Raymond laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh. "A boat? You think after what you did at the hotel earlier, I'd let you live? David, you embarrassed me. You dragged the foundation's reputation through the mud. You are a liability, a burden." David's eyes widened. He stepped back, realizing that he had been set up. "But that message! You said you wanted to make peace." "I never sent any message, you fool!" shouted Mr. Raymond. "You're the one who threatened to leak the foundation documents. Where are they? Hand them over now. And maybe I'll consider letting your body be found intact." David shook his head in confusion. Then his anger exploded. He realized there was a third party playing. But his hatred for Mr. Raymond had clouded his logic. "You want to kill me, just like we killed Kevin? Go ahead. But just so you know, I've recorded all our conversations all this time. If I die, that recording is automatically sent to the media." David was lying. I knew he didn't have that recording, but he was bluffing to survive. Mr. Raymond's face turned red. "You little brat! You're the one who poisoned that kid. You're the one who poured that medicine into his mouth every night. Don't bring me into this. I only told you to handle the inheritance issue, not to kill your own flesh and blood." "Don't be a hypocrite," David shouted, his voice piercing high. "You're the one who introduced me to that poison supplier. You're the one who said the dose had to be increased so the process would be fast. You needed that money to cover your gambling debts. Admit it. We are both demons here. I recorded everything from above. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from a terrifying satisfaction. They were admitting everything to each other. Every detail of Kevin's murder, the money motive, the involvement of other parties, everything was spoken clearly from their own mouths. There was nothing more to deny. This was a death sentence for both of them. Daniel beside me gave a thumbs up, a signal that the police outside had heard everything through the audio tap we installed. Suddenly, Mr. Raymond pulled a pistol from behind his jacket and pointed it at David's head. Enough talk. Goodbye, my useless son-in-law. The sound of the shot hadn't yet fired when the police sirens wailed, breaking the silence of the night, piercingly sharp from all directions of the warehouse. The red and blue spotlights penetrated the cracks in the warehouse walls, creating a terrifying disco of light in that dark room. A megaphone voice was heard loudly from outside. "This is the police. Surround this place. Drop the weapon and surrender." Mr. Raymond was startled. His concentration broke instantly. He turned toward the main door with a panicked face. That opportunity was not wasted by David. With a wild survival instinct, David lunged at Mr. Raymond's old body. They both fell rolling onto the dusty concrete floor. The pistol in Mr. Raymond's hand was thrown far to the corner of the room. A fierce struggle occurred between the two criminals. David, who was younger and stronger, though in a shattered mental condition, managed to hit Mr. Raymond's face repeatedly until the old man was unconscious and helpless. However, David didn't stop there. He had no intention of surrendering to the police. His wild eyes searched for a way out. He saw the back door of the warehouse slightly open, but before he ran, his eyes caught something on the second floor, at our hiding place. The flash of Daniel's camera lens, reflecting the police spotlight, leaked our position. David looked up, and for the first time since he fled from the hotel, our eyes met. There, on the rusty iron catwalk, I stood staring at him. My navy blue headscarf was partially open, showing my real face, no longer the face of the cleaning service disguise. David's gaze changed from fear to a burning, pure hatred. He realized everything now. That the ghost that terrorized him, those fake messages, this trap, all of it was my doing. "Hilda!" he screamed, his voice like the howl of a wounded beast. Instead of running away, David instead ran toward the iron stairs toward where we were. He had gone mad. He no longer cared about the police outside. His only goal now was to destroy me. Daniel pulled my hand. "Run, Hilda! To the roof!" We ran along that iron bridge, toward the emergency exit on the warehouse roof. The sound of David's heavy footsteps chasing behind grew closer, accompanied by the loud clanging of iron clashing. We forced open the roof door and came out into the open air. A rainstorm greeted us, the strong wind almost making me stumble. We were on the roof of a 3-story warehouse. Below, dozens of police cars had already blocked the front area, but the back area facing the sea was still dark. There was a fire escape on the side of the building, leading to a small dock. "Quick, get down!" Daniel shouted, pushing me toward the ladder. However, it was too late. The roof door was kicked open with such force that its hinges came off. David appeared with a bloodied face, holding a long iron bar he must have picked up somewhere. Daniel tried to block him, trying to be a shield for me, but David swung that iron bar brutally. hitting Daniel until a bone-cracking sound was heard. Daniel groaned in pain and fell face down, rolling on the slippery roof. "Daniel!" I screamed. I was about to help him, but David's large hand already grabbed my headscarf, pulling me harshly until I fell backward. Unbelievable pain radiated through my scalp. David dragged me toward the edge of the roof, making me a human shield as he saw several police officers starting to climb up from the other side. "Stay back, or I'll throw her down." David threatened the police, who were now pointing weapons at him. The police stopped moving, hesitant. The rain washed my face, masking my tears. I could smell the sweat and blood from David's body as it pressed against my back. His breath was racing in my ear, hot and disgusting. "You think you're smart, huh?" David whispered in my ear, his hand wrapping tightly around my neck, choking me slowly. "You think you can win against me? If I'm going to hell, my dear wife, you're coming with me. We'll be a family again with Kevin there." "You're not Kevin's father," I hissed with difficulty, scratching his arm that was choking me. "You're his killer." My words triggered his anger again. David became even more insane. He dragged me down the fire escape harshly, taking me toward his car, which turned out to be parked hidden behind a pile of containers behind the warehouse. Not the sedan he used earlier, but an old SUV he apparently stole in his flight. He threw me into the passenger seat, pointing a sharp piece of broken glass at my neck and cuffing my hands to the handrail above the door with his tie. He jumped into the driver's seat and hit the gas. The car sped out of the harbor area, crashing through a wire fence. The police immediately pursued. A terrifying car chase occurred in the middle of the storm. David drove like a possessed person, running red lights, driving against traffic, and sideswiping several other vehicles. The police sirens wailed behind us like a choir of death. My body was thrown left and right, my head hitting the window glass repeatedly. "Stop it, David! You won't get away!" I shouted. "Shut up!" he barked while hitting the steering wheel. "I won't be poor again. I won't rot in prison. We're going far away, Hilda. Very far." Our car sped toward an overpass that was under repair. The road there was slippery and narrow because of the project's concrete barriers. Ahead, I saw a police barricade already set up blocking the road. The police spotlights were blinding. Behind, the pursuing cars were getting closer. We were trapped. David slammed the steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid the barricade, but the car lost control on the wet asphalt. The car spun wildly, tires screeching deafeningly, then hit the bridge barrier hard. The front of the car was crushed, smoke billowing out from the engine hood. The windshield was shattered into 1,000 pieces. My head was dizzy from the impact, fresh blood flowing from my temple. I saw David beside me. He was severely injured, blood pouring from his nose, his leg pinned by the dented car body. But he was still conscious. He looked at me, then looked at the police pistols now surrounding our car from all directions. He laughed, a desperate, pathetic laugh. He grabbed a large piece of broken glass from the destroyed dashboard, then pulled me closer. He had no intention of surrendering. He opened his damaged car door, dragging me out with him to the edge of the bridge. Below was the dark, fast-flowing river ready to swallow us. "One more step and she dies!" David screamed at the police. He pressed that piece of glass right against the vein in my neck. I could feel the cold and sharp glass cutting thin into my skin. It stung, but strangely, I was no longer afraid. My fear had been exhausted by grief. What was left was the determination to end this. I looked into David's eyes, seeing the reflection of a demon there, and I knew I had to do something drastic. This was no longer about survival. This was about making sure he got his karma, even if I had to be hurt. The storm on that overpass seemed to be a silent witness to the final battle between truth and evil. The strong wind pushed, slapping my face, which was wet with rain mixed with blood. Below, the dark river flowed rapidly, ready to swallow anyone who fell into it. However, that natural horror was nothing compared to the horror I felt from David's breath in my ear. The sharp piece of glass was pressed tightly against my neck, so tightly that I could feel the sting of the thin cut starting to bleed warm blood. David stood behind me, using my body as a human shield from the dozens of police firearms pointing at us. The blinding spotlights made my eyes ache, but I forced myself to keep them open. I didn't want to die with my eyes closed. I wanted to see this man's destruction. David was screaming like a madman, his raspy voice cutting through the sound of the rain. He demanded a helicopter, demanded ransom money, demanded a clear path. Nonsensical demands from a man who had lost his mind. The police responded through the loudspeaker, asking David to be calm and release the hostage. But that negotiation only made David more aggressive. His grip on my arm grew stronger, as if my bones would break. I could feel his racing heartbeat against my back, the heartbeat of a coward afraid of the consequences of his actions. In that hanging moment, the fear that had been paralyzing me earlier slowly evaporated, replaced by an odd calmness. I remembered Kevin's pale face in the coffin. I remembered Mrs. Riley's terrified face before she was killed. They didn't have the chance to fight back, but I did. I was still alive, and I was in control of this fear. I glanced down at David's feet. His right leg was severely injured from the car crash earlier, pinned by the vehicle before he dragged me out. Fresh blood soaked through his torn pants. He leaned heavily on his left leg. That was his weakness. I gathered all the remaining strength in my shivering body. I no longer cared if the glass on my neck would cut deeper. In one long breath, I did the most unexpected thing. I twisted my body with all my might, ignoring the stinging in my neck, and sank my teeth as deep as possible into David's arm that held the glass. I bit him with full force, the strength of an angry mother, until I tasted the copper flavor of his blood in my mouth. David screamed in pain. His body's reflex made him loosen his grip for a moment. The piece of glass slipped from his hand and fell clinking on the wet asphalt. Not wasting a single second, I lifted my right foot and kicked his injured right knee with all my might. A horrifying crack was heard. The sound of bone breaking or joints being completely crushed. David's scream this time was much louder, a piercing howl of pure pain that made my hair stand on end. His large body slumped to the asphalt, unable to support its own weight. He rolled around clutching his leg, forgetting my presence, forgetting the police, forgetting everything except that unbearable pain. The police wasted no time. Within seconds, they swarmed forward. I was pulled back by burly uniformed hands, distance from David, who was still groaning on the ground. Several officers immediately pinned David's body, harshly handcuffing his hands behind his back. However, David still tried to fight, kicking with his remaining healthy leg, spitting and cursing. One of the police officers had to subdue him with a warning shot directed near his left leg because he tried to grab an officer's weapon. The sound of the shot ended David's resistance. He slumped helplessly, blood pooling around his body, mixing with the rain that continued to pour mercilessly. I stood there, behind the police line, staring at him with gasping breath. That handsome face I once loved was now covered in blood and mud, grimacing in pain, staring at me with a blank gaze. The paramedics immediately came to swarm me, cleaning the wound on my neck, wrapping me in an orange thermal blanket, and asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the figure of David being lifted onto a stretcher under super tight guard. As the stretcher passed in front of me, David turned. There was no more arrogance, no more of that empty stare, only fear. He realized his life was over. Daniel appeared from the crowd of paramedics in the back, his arm bandaged because of the bone crack from David's blow on the warehouse roof earlier. He walked limping toward me, his face bruised, but his eyes radiating immense relief. He wrapped his one healthy arm around my shoulder, and at that moment, my defenses crumbled. I cried, not from sadness, but because the heavy burden that had been pressing on my chest was finally lifted. The next day, the news of the arrest of David and Mr. Raymond became the headline on all national television stations and print media. Their faces were clearly displayed as the masterminds of planned murder and foundation corruption. However, the prison sentence was only the beginning of their karma. The universe works in mysterious and painful ways to balance the scales of justice. David was rushed to the police hospital with his right leg severely crushed. The doctor said that infection from his open wound, exposed to dirty road water and iron fragments from the car, had spread very quickly, causing gangrene. His leg tissue rotted within hours, as if his own body rejected its presence. In the cold prison isolation room smelling of harsh medicine, David received a medical diagnosis that shattered his soul. To save his life from the spread of the blood infection, the doctor had to perform an amputation. The irony was so thick in the air. David, who poisoned his own child until his internal organs were slowly damaged, now had to see a part of his own body cut off and thrown away. When he woke from the operation, he found his right leg was gone up to the knee. He screamed hysterically, cried, begged for this to be just a nightmare, but it was real. He who was once so proud of his physical appearance, who always wanted to look perfect and authoritative, was now permanently disabled. He had to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair or with a cane, becoming the symbol of the weakness he most hated. Karma had taken his steps, just as he had taken Kevin's future. Meanwhile, Mr. Raymond's fate was no less pitiful. The old man who all this time had been worshipped as a generous public figure was arrested in the warehouse, in an unconscious state after being beaten by David. However, the physical blows were nothing compared to the mental blow he received. During police interrogation, Mr. Raymond's blood pressure skyrocketed. He suffered a severe stroke in the temporary detention cell. The stroke paralyzed half of his body and damaged his ability to speak. The man who used to be so eloquent, who could manipulate people with sweet words and captivating speeches, could now only make unclear groaning sounds. His mouth was crooked, drool constantly dripping without control. He lay helpless on the thin prison mattress, completely dependent on others' help, even for using the bathroom. His wealth was seized by the state. His family left him in shame, and he spent his days staring at the damp cell ceiling with a blank gaze full of regret. Bella, the secretary and mistress, also did not escape the legal net. She was arrested at the airport while trying to flee abroad with jewelry given to her by David. In front of investigators, Bella tried to save herself by shifting all the blame onto David. She provided all additional evidence, including illegal financial transaction records she kept as insurance. However, her betrayal did not free her. She was charged with multiple counts as an accomplice and for being involved in the planning of the murder. Her beautiful face that always used to be covered in expensive makeup was now dull and wilted behind the iron bars. She became a target of bullying by other female inmates who hated homewreckers and child killers. Her glamorous life was replaced with the harsh, punishing life of prison. I and Daniel monitored all these developments from afar. We didn't feel any pity at all. Every time I saw news about their suffering, I only remembered Kevin, who was moaning in pain alone in his room. The pain they were experiencing now was not yet comparable to the innocent life they had taken. But at least they were suffering. They were shattered physically, mentally, and socially. Society condemned them. There was no place left for them to hide. The reputation they boasted of had become trash. One afternoon, I was asked to come to the prison hospital to provide additional testimony. I passed through the heavily guarded corridor toward the room where David was being treated. Through the small window in the door, I saw him. David was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at a blank wall. His body was skin and bones, his face gaunt and covered with an unkempt beard. He looked 10 years older. No longer the gallant David. There were only the remnants of a broken human. When he realized my presence behind the glass, he turned slowly. Our eyes met. I saw tears flowing down his hollow cheeks. He tried to move his lips, maybe wanting to apologize, or maybe begging for mercy. But I felt nothing but emptiness. The hatred that once burned in my chest had gone out, replaced by a calming coldness. I didn't look away. I stared at him straight on, letting him see that I was still standing tall, whole, and strong. I, the woman he considered weak, was the one who destroyed him. I turned around and walked away, leaving David crying alone in the agonizing silence, trapped in his disabled body and his unforgivable sins. 6 months had passed since that storm night on the bridge. Time passed slowly but surely, healing the physical wounds even though leaving scars that would never fully disappear. This morning, the Chicago sky was so bright, a clear blue without clouds, as if the universe were opening a new chapter in my life. I stood in front of a large mirror in my room. Not the room in my old house full of bad memories, but in a new house that was simpler and warmer. I straightened my cream-colored scarf, a color that symbolized peace. The face in the mirror was no longer Hilda's face that was terrified and puffy with tears. It was the face of a woman who had walked through hell and come out as a winner. There was a line of firmness in my jaw, a light of fortitude in my eyes. Today was the day of the final sentencing. The courthouse was filled with journalists, child protection activists, and the public who had followed this case since the beginning. The courtroom felt crowded and hot, but I felt cool and calm. Daniel sat beside me, wearing a neat button-down shirt. His arm was completely healed, and he was back to being a reliable friend. He held my hand tightly as the panel of judges entered the room. The knock of the judge's gavel opened this long-awaited session. David was pushed in a wheelchair. He looked down deeply, not daring to look at the spectators who jeered at him. Mr. Raymond could not attend because his health condition was deteriorating, so he was represented by his lawyer. But the legal process continued for him. Bella sat in another defendant's chair with a deathly pale face, constantly biting her lip until it bled. The public prosecutor read the charges in a booming voice, once again detailing the cruelty they committed. Planning the murder of a minor, document forgery, corruption, up to the disappearance of the key witness, Mrs. Riley. The presiding judge, a middle-aged woman with a sharp and wise gaze, began reading her verdict. The room was deathly silent, as if everyone were holding their breath together. Word after word came from the judge's mouth, piercing the defendants' hearts. David is proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have committed planned murder against his own biological son for the motive of controlling wealth, considering there are no mitigating factors, and his actions are classified as very sadistic and injure the conscience of humanity. The judge sentences him to the maximum penalty, the death penalty. The courtroom exploded with cries of gratitude. "Thank God!" several people shouted in the back. David was startled in his wheelchair. His body shook violently, and for the first time I heard him howl and cry loudly, the sound of a late regret. He gripped his wheelchair handles as if wanting to run, but he couldn't go anywhere. The death sentence was the end of his journey. Mr. Raymond was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that was even more cruel to him because he had to rot in a cell with a paralyzed body until his death. Bella was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Justice had been served. The gavel was struck 3 times, closing the dark chapter of my past legally. After the session ended, I didn't go straight home. There was one last mission to complete, to truly close this book. All assets of David and Mr. Raymond seized by the state, as well as my father's inheritance money. That was the source of this disaster. I managed to save through Daniel's legal struggle. I didn't want to use a single cent of that money for my personal benefit. That money was covered in Kevin's blood. I wanted to clean it. We went toward an old building on the outskirts of the city that had just finished being renovated. Over the gate was a beautiful sign with colorful writing, "Kevin's House, Foundation for Child Protection and Education." Yes, I used all that inheritance money to build an orphanage and safe house for children who were victims of domestic violence. This place would be a paradise for those who shared the same fate as Kevin, a place where they would be protected, loved, and heard. I walked through the orphanage halls painted in bright colors. The sound of children's laughter was heard from the playground in the back. I saw children running after balls, playing on swings and singing. The sight made my heart warm. In the main lobby, a large photo of Kevin smiling widely was hung, and beside it was Mrs. Riley's photo. I also set aside some funds to renovate the school where Mrs. Riley used to teach, building a new library named the Riley Library, so that her name would always be remembered as an educational hero, not a murder victim. In the evening, when the sun began to lean toward the west and emitted a melancholic golden light, I and Daniel went to the public cemetery. Kevin's and Mrs. Riley's graves were side by side under the shade of a shady frangipani tree. The grass over their graves had grown green and lush, scattered with fresh flowers brought by people who sympathized. I crouched beside Kevin's headstone, rubbing his name engraved on the black marble stone. There were no more suffocating tears of sadness. What was, there was only a peaceful longing. "I have finished everything, son," I whispered softly to the headstone. "They have been punished. Your money I have used to help your other friends. You don't need to be in pain anymore now. You can play as much as you want in heaven." The evening wind blew gently, swaying the leaves of the frangipani tree until several white petals fell slowly onto my lap. The atmosphere in the cemetery was so silent and sacred. Daniel stood a bit far back, giving me private space to talk with my son. I offered a prayer, sending all my love and longing through every prayer. I felt relieved, as if a 1,000-ton burden had finally lifted from my shoulders. I had kept my promise as a mother. I had defended my child to the last breath. When I stood up and was about to leave, something miraculous happened. The setting sun created a beautiful light bias among the trees. At the end of the cemetery path, about 30 feet in front of me, I saw a small silhouette standing. My heart stirred, but not out of fear. The figure was wearing pajamas with Kevin's favorite superhero on them, the same pajamas I put on him for the last time before he was buried. It was Kevin. He didn't look pale or in pain as in my nightmares all this time. He looked healthy, his cheeks were rosy, and his smile was so bright it was blinding. Kevin said nothing. He just stood there, looking at me with happy, shining eyes. He lifted his right hand and waved slowly at me. A sweet farewell wave, a wave saying, "I'm okay, Mom. Thank you." My tears fell once, tears of happiness. I returned his wave with a trembling hand and a wide smile on my face. "Goodbye, dear," I whispered. Kevin's silhouette slowly faded as the sunlight dimmed, merging with the warmth of the evening, then disappearing completely. But the warm feeling in my chest did not disappear. Kevin was at peace. He had truly gone to a better place, taking all his pain with him. I turned around. Daniel smiled at me, reaching out his hand. I accepted his hand firmly. We walked together, leaving the cemetery area, leaving the dark past behind our backs. Ahead, the road stretched wide, lit by the city lights that began to turn on one by one. Life is still long, and I'm ready to live it. I'm no longer just a victim or a grieving mother. I am Hilda, the woman who survived the storm, the founder of Kevin's house, and the defender of voiceless children. A new dawn has broken, and I step to welcome it with my head held high.